Oh, hi, Troll Buddy Zoo here, and I've recently noticed something of a schism in the retro handhelds world, the retro handhelds community. On one hand, we have super budget items that are so ubiquitous that I see them on TikTok ads, I see them on Facebook, I see them on Reels. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have these portable battle stations that are more powerful than people's dedicated gaming PCs from just a couple years ago. It's nuts. I mean, look at this thing. This is one of the first retro handhelds I ever owned, the PocketGo S30. It played SNES games. It played some PS1, not a lot, but some. The screen was fine. The buttons were fine. It was fine. And I loved it because it fit in my pocket and I could take it anywhere. I could play Super Nintendo games on the bus. That's pretty cool. This is what I'm using most of the time now. It's the AYN Thor. It has dual AMOLED screens. It's perfect, beyond perfect 3DS emulation if you enable texture packs. I just did a video on that. It plays Android games, Android apps, game streaming, and it costs more than probably the first, I don't know, 5, 6 handhelds I bought combined. And this, you got a Snapdragon 8 Elite, an Adreno 830 GPU, 16 gigs of RAM, half a terabyte of storage, and an 8,000 milliamp hour battery. And this is a retro handheld, apparently. And I'm not complaining, these are both amazing devices, but somewhere between the PocketGo S30 here and the Odin 3, I stopped being able to explain what a retro handheld is. And that's kind of confusing to me, especially since the name of our channel and our website and our Discord is retrohandhelds.gg. I don't know if you remember this, but my very first review on the channel was of a famiclone. It was one of those fake little mini TV deals that came preloaded with a couple hundred NES games, and most of them were duplicates, and a bunch of them were games I've never heard of before, like mowing, but it cost like 20 bucks. And so I sat down with my cell phone and I made a video and I let you know if it was worth your $15 to $20. And that's how I started on the channel, all the way back in September 2022. And back then the hobby was kind of the same way because it was simple. It was pure almost. You bought a cheap device, you put some ROMs on it, and you played your old games from when you were a kid. Nobody was talking about Snapdragon processors or AMOLED screens or upscaling. It was just, hey, I can play Pokemon on here. I can play Fire Emblem on a little Super Nintendo controller with a screen in the middle, and that's pretty cool. Then the chips started to get better. You had the 351 line from Ambernick that pushed into and through PlayStation 1. You got a little bit of Dreamcast, a little bit of N64. And then before too long, you had the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, which got you solidly into N64, into Dreamcast. You could emulate pretty much every game on those systems. And then suddenly, retro expanded. A little bit of GameCube, a little bit of PS2 became possible. And then almost the entire library. And then the entire library of GameCube and PS2. Then you had the Odin 2 and all the different variants that set the standard for high-end stuff, including Switch emulation. Then you have the Thor here, which came out late last year with the same guts as the Odin 2. And I'm sitting here thinking, this is a 3DS on steroids. How did we get here in just a couple years? And then the Odin 3 landed on my desk. It's a Snapdragon 8 Elite chip. It's the same chip that's in, heck, a lot of flagship phones that cost $1,000. Got 16 gigs of RAM, half a terabyte of storage. It upscales PS2 to 3x, sometimes 4x. Plays Switch, plays Game Pass, plays Genshin Impact. It does everything. And we call this a retro handheld because it can play Chrono Trigger. When I started, a retro handheld was a device that played retro games, but now I'm reviewing x86 devices that have Windows on them, and they have more processing power, legitimately, than my laptop I use for my day-to-day work. At what point did we leave retro behind? I'm not mad, I'm just genuinely curious, because it all has changed so rapidly. The original promise of this hobby was accessibility. A basic $50 device like this and maybe a YouTube tutorial and you were on your way. You didn't need to know about different chipsets or Android launchers or different RetroArch cores. You charged it, you loaded up some games, and you played. That was it. It was beautiful. And that's what built this community. Honest to God, just a bunch of dads trapped in their houses during COVID looking for a way to return to simpler times. Now, the flagship tier starts at like $330 and goes all the way up to like $500. The Odin 3 costs more than a Nintendo Switch. These are incredible machines, and yet they're not accessible in the same way that these $50 specials were back in the day. I'm not saying expensive devices shouldn't exist. I own them, I review them, I use them all the time. But I remember what it felt like when I bought the PocketGo S here, and I realized I could play Chrono Trigger on my lunch break on a device that's basically a Super Nintendo controller with a screen in the middle. That was cool. That was serendipitous. That was amazing. And I worry that we might be building a hobby where some people wander in, they see a $330 price tag, and they say, that's too rich for my blood, and they scoot. The community has split into tiers that don't always understand each other. The premium tier talks about upscaling and frame rates and benchmarks, while the budget tier talks about custom firmware, battery life, and which $50 device has the best D-pad on it. And both sides are right. They're just having parallel conversations. Sometimes they have parallel conversations in the comment sections on the same video, which gets kind of weird. But I see it. I see it all the time when I post a video. I see it all the time in our Discord. And here's the thing that not a lot of people talk about, because when a device runs Android, it stops being just an emulation machine. It's a streaming box. It's a Game Pass device. It's a Netflix device. It's a Genshin Impact machine. And oh, by the way, sometimes you can emulate things on it. The Odin 3 is basically a gaming handheld that also happens to do emulation. It's not the other way around. And the Thor here is the same story. I play a ton of 3DS on here, but I can also watch Netflix. I can also do Game Pass. I have done Game Pass on here. It does a lot of things just besides emulation. And is that bad? No, not inherently. Not bad at all. More capability is more capability, but it starts to fundamentally change what our hobby is all about. It's just that when one of the top-selling devices in the entire hobby also happens to be a solid-as-hell Game Pass option, the conversation starts to drift more towards modern gaming and not towards retro gaming. And again, it's not a huge deal, but retro handhelds are kind of made for retro games. Like I said before, my first video was about a famiclone that played a bunch of goofy NES games. Now I'm making videos about HD texture packs for 3DS games and for XR glasses and devices with all different sorts of Snapdragon processors. The channel evolved because the hobby evolved, but on some level, I want to make sure we're still talking about games and not just hardware. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why you may have noticed more game-specific kind of videos coming out from me, because I don't want to lose one of the main reasons why we all got into this hobby in the first place. Old games. You got the ROM hack community, the fan translation community, the custom firmware community. You got Newly, MinUI, MooOS, NextUI, I'm probably missing a whole bunch, Spruce, Onion OS, all of that stuff. And you got people who are making new games on old systems like Ember of Mana. These are the people that are keeping old games alive. They're not buying a $400 handheld. They're buying these cheap ones, and they're trying to squeeze as much power out of them as they can. They're building tools so a kid in 2026 can play an old Game Boy game that otherwise would be lost to time for him. But the mainstream handheld buyer, the person that sees an ad for a Retroid Pocket 5 on TikTok or something, they don't know any of that. They just want to play Pokemon on a cool gadget that vaguely looks like a GameCube controller. And that's fine. That's great. We want more people in the community playing games. But as the mainstream audience grows, as the preservation audience stays relatively small, the center of gravity in the community kind of shifts. The loudest conversation stops being, hey, here's this game you never heard of, and it moves towards, look at the specs on this, look at the benchmark numbers on this new device. The people who build custom firmware for a $50 Linux handheld are some of the most important voices in our community, and they're increasingly drowned out by spec comparison or benchmark videos, including mine. I'm part of the problem. I'm not pointing fingers at you, I'm pointing fingers at myself. And I think acknowledging that is maybe the first step towards being more intentional when it comes to just focusing more on gaming in general and retro games as opposed to pure hardware. Okay, so here's where I answer the question, is it a problem that retro handhelds aren't necessarily retro anymore? Well, the growth is good. Let's be clear about that. The growth in the hobby overall is good. More people in the hobby means more devices, more competition, ultimately, hopefully, better products. The fact that someone could go on a Best Buy or Walmart website and buy a Retroid device or an Ambernick device That's crazy. 4 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. 4 years ago, I was also reviewing a $15 famiclone to probably 30 or 40 people. So the growth is objectively, undeniably good. But something is getting lost. Not the technology. The technology is better than ever. I think some of the simplicity has been lost. The feeling of picking up a small, cheap device and just playing the game. No launcher to configure, no Android stuff to set up, no debate about which of the 6 different cores in RetroArch you want to use. You just turn it on, start the game, and you play. I have an Odin 3, I have a Thor, I probably have at least 100 other random devices scattered around my house. But you know what I always carry in my work bag for some quick pick-up and play sessions? It's this. It's the RG35XX SP. Because I open it, I pick a game, and I'm playing. There's not 12 nested menus. It's just, I pick my game and I start playing, and there's something good about that. There's something simple about it. Something pure. It's like the difference between a Swiss Army knife and a really well-made chef's knife. The Swiss Army knife does everything, but the chef's knife does one thing perfectly. Now, both have value, and I own both. I actually own a lot of hyper-specialized chef's knives, if we want to take this analogy to the nth degree. I got a Game Boy knife. I got a Game Boy Advance knife. I got a Sega knife over there somewhere. You get the idea. But if you only own the Swiss Army knives, these high-end beasts like the Odin 3 or the Legion Go, you forget the simplicity of holding something that was made for one thing and one thing only, and something that does that one task very, very well. And I think the hobby needs both lanes. They need the premium lane, where the technology expands and the limits are pushed forward, and the simple lane, where a $50 device plays Super Nintendo games and it does it well, and that's all it needs to do. The premium lane gives us stuff like the Odin 3 and all those x86 devices, while the budget lane gives us the TrimUI brick. It gives us the XX line from Ambernick. And I like both lanes. I like both types of devices. The problem isn't that the premium lane exists. The problem will arise if, for whatever reason, if the simple lane starts to get pushed to the side, because the simple lane is where a lot of us entered this hobby. The simple lane is where preservation lives. The simple lane is where custom firmware is developed. The simple lane is where a lot of us started. It's where I started. And if you don't have an on-ramp to get onto the retro handheld highway, then it's just a bunch of people stuck driving in a big circle like a NASCAR race. The convergence isn't stopping because devices are going to keep getting more powerful, more generalized, and unfortunately, more expensive. There's already a ton of x86 devices out there that run full Windows with OLED screens, and they have Ryzen AMD processors in them. The line between retro handheld and portable PC gaming is starting to blur, and maybe in a couple years it might vanish entirely. But the counter movement is already starting to happen too. The TrimUI brick sells, the Miyoo Mini Plus sells. Evercade exists specifically to resist the complexity to the point where they have physical cartridges that you slot into the back of your device or into your console. And you get curated libraries, no ROMs, no setups, and you get that little tactile thrill from collecting boxes and collecting carts. Custom firmware communities are thriving because they make cheap handhelds just absolutely sing. And there's a whole subset of the hobby that's choosing that simplicity, choosing that more budget, let's squeeze as much power out of it option, as opposed to the premium stuff with just raw, crazy performance. And I think that choice is becoming more deliberate, more intentional in some cases, especially as the premium side becomes more and more powerful. I think the future might be two hobbies sharing the same name. And that's okay as long as you remember the person playing PlayStation 1 games on their Miyoo Mini Plus and the person playing 4X upscaled PS2 on their Odin 3, they're both part of it. Different devices, different hardware, but the same shared love for gaming. And honestly, with all this AI crap drinking up our water and making RAM prohibitively expensive, there might be a resurgence in the super cheap Linux devices. These devices don't need a ton of RAM, and the RAM they do have isn't exactly cutting edge, so maybe they'll be safe from the RAM apocalypse that's coming towards us, although I probably just jinxed it. Dang it. I don't know. The name Retro Handhelds might not be a great fit anymore, But the idea that started it, the desire to play old games and cool form factors that were portable, I think that lives on. I still have this. It still works, and honestly, still pretty good. Well, Gary, the clock on the wall says it's time for What Did We Learn? And we learned that retro handhelds aren't really retro anymore, and I'm not really sure what to call them. We learned that your buddy Zoo went from reviewing famiclones to reviewing devices that are significantly more powerful than the laptop he had just a couple years ago. We learned that power and simplicity are pulling in different directions, and it's kind of complicated. And we learned that sometimes the best device on your shelf is the cheapest one because it gets out of your way and just lets you pick up and play. What's your favorite retro handheld? Is it one of the more powerful ones? Or do you have a soft spot for an older, cheaper option? I genuinely want to know, so tell me in the comments. Do you think I'm making sense, or do you think I'm full of crap? I kind of have a feeling that the answers are going to be all over the place. If you thought this video was all over the place, remember to like and subscribe and all that jazz. We're still pushing towards 100,000 subscribers. And I tell you what, if you like just a little bit of the video, just ring the bell. Click the thumbs up. All the other crap you're supposed to do. Subscribe, whatever. You gotta pump up them numbers, baby. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.